Well, we're going to be discussing this VW bus. This is similar to this is a Brazilian bus actually, but it's similar to a German 60s vintage bus. And we're talking about some of the modifications or adjustments we make when converting it to electric. So we're going to talk about some things in the back end of it here, and so let me show you what we're talking about. So as you can see, we've already removed the engine and fuel tank as well as the battery. Normally the 12-volt starting battery goes back over here on the passenger side, voltage regulator there on the fender. And what we're going to do is we're going to relocate the battery to the opposite side. And if you watched a previous video series on the 1966, I think it was, 23 window bus, you'll see that, you know, we relocated the battery on that one also. And this is basically pretty similar rear end. I think that one had the spare tire well in the back here, which took up some room, but doesn't affect the battery install. So anyway, main reason we're going to relocate the battery to the driver's side is to free up the area here for our charger. And the reason we want to locate the charger there is because this is the same side of the vehicle that the fuel door is on. And so this will allow us to have our charge port in the same location as the original fuel port. And so this is where we'll put the J1772 charge port right in here. And then that wiring, the 220/30 amp wiring, will run to the charger, which will be in close proximity. And let me leave that door open. Let's go back here, open this. Don't you love this tape? Snazzy, huh? Not our doing. With that open, we'll see some light coming through. So you can see where that charge port will be and where the charger will be. So it's just a much more convenient place to put the charger in close proximity to your charge port, so we don't have to run that high voltage wiring very far. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing next in this project, is we'll mount the charger in that area, and we will install the charge port, and we'll relocate the battery. And it's just a matter of running the 12 volt from the battery, and you're only doing the positive. The negative is going to be attached to the chassis, and so it's just a little additional wiring run here, a few feet. So that's a very simple way to make the change here. And you can see right here that when this thing was transported to us, they put the tie-down strap over this axle, the axle tube right there, and in doing so, they caught the brake line, and they basically ripped the brake line right out of the connector there where it goes to the flex hose. So we received it. It doesn't have any brakes. Brakes don't work. So that line would need to be replaced in order to get the brakes working again. You can see what it's supposed to look like on the other side here. And we are strictly a conversion shop. We don't typically do repairs or restoration work or anything like that. So we won't be repairing that, and we'll just test drive this in the parking lot using the regen to stop. And we'll do it on like a Sunday when there's nobody around and we don't have to worry about making an unplanned stop. So anyway, yeah, this is kind of an interesting setup because it is a 1973 bus. But it doesn't look like a 1973 bus to most of us that are familiar with the German VWs. This looks like a 60s vintage 23 window, but in reality it's a Brazilian made 1973 bus. Do a quick little walk around over here. So it's going to be somewhat similar to the 66 that we recently featured in a video. We only feature 1/100th, 1/100th of the vehicles that we convert, because it'd just be super boring. We do a lot of VWs, Porsches, Mercedes, and it's the same stuff over and over. This one is kind of different in that it's from Brazil, and it's not something that we see a lot here in the U.S. I mean, check out the door handle. This really old style, like 50s vintage, I think. But yeah, it's very reminiscent of the 60s vintage German ones. And so what we're going to do here is like we did on that 66. We'll replace the fuel gauge and our motor controller gauge. The Curtis 840 display will go right there, and then we'll put our JLD 404 right here. And then I always like having the 12 volt gauge. We always use a VDO 12 volt gauge to keep tabs on our 12 volt system and the DC to DC converter. I just realized something else that's different on this one. It doesn't have that windshield washer reservoir right here that 66 had, which I didn't really care for it there. It's kind of unsightly. So we'll probably put the JLD 404 here as well as the 12 volt gauge. If we don't put the 12 volt gauge here, we'll stick it in the back like we did on that one in the engine bay, and you can refer to it there if you have any questions about your 12 volt system. Interesting thing about gauges is most people never look at them. They may look at the speedometer once in a while, but if you know the number of people that run out of gas every day, people just aren't watching their gauges. I think that's why they went to idiot lights. It was cheaper, and they probably get people's attention better. But anyway, I like gauges, but we want the minimal gauges. We don't want to, we're not going to adulterate this dash. We won't be drilling any holes. And so, but we will have that Curtis 840 display that will replace the fuel gauge. That monitors our inverter and the motor. So it's going to give us our RPMs, our motor voltage and current, our inverter temperature, motor temperature, so forth. And then the JLD 404, that's what's going to monitor our battery pack, as well as add some control functions, and that will go right there. Kind of a little shot of the interior here. It's got 3 rows of seats. Let's open the side door. I'll give you a look the interior, a little better look in the interior here. Ladder goes up the side here. I don't think I'd want to step on this. Just doesn't look that sturdy to me, but anyway, maybe it is. So let's take a look at the interior here. So like I said, it doesn't have the spare in the rear corner. Instead, they put it right here. And so it's, you access it right here. So the seat, if I can do this, hold the camera and do this at the same time. But anyway, you move the passenger seat, and there it is. So, which is actually probably a better location for it in a lot of aspects. It moves the weight forward, and it allows you to have more space in the back there for whatever purpose. And then another thing you can do is you can mount this on the front of the vehicle. It's probably not as aesthetically pleasing, but that would give you this space for some other purpose and puts the weight further forward and gives you a little extra energy absorbing thing out in the front, because there's nothing between you and the other car on these things. Bumper's not much, so what it mounts to isn't much, and it's just some sheet metal. I mean, there's just no crash protection at all in these things. But they definitely have a feel and flair all their own. So we'll see how time goes, if we have time to share some more input on this one with you. I just wanted to show you a couple things, just because it is different. It's a Brazilian bus, 1973, but it looks like a 60s, early 60s vintage German bus. And so just something a little different to share with you. So here's a shot with the charge port installed. Plug it in. There you go. There she be. So that's the charge port on the 1973 Brazilian bus. Well, to finish off this video, here's the fuel door with the tape and tape residue removed. And of course, as we showed you before, the J1772 charge port. And then we talked about relocating the battery to the driver's side. And so here's the 12-volt battery. This is the battery the car had when we received it. And it's been relocated to the driver's side. And we've added a tie-down set up here. And so the battery is not going to go anywhere. It's really rigid. You'd be surprised how often we see these things just sitting in here loose. Above it we have the DC to DC converter. The output is wired. The input is not wired yet, as we don't have the traction pack components in place yet. We've got our terminal strip. This terminal strip in the rear here is the the end point for the wiring that comes from front to rear. So there's another terminal strip up in the front of the vehicle. I'll show you that. And so the wiring looms that come from front to rear, these are their termination points. And so everything else then will connect to those that needs to go to the front. And then also we have some components that will be on our component board, which will be above the motor, or in front of the motor, not above it, but above and in front of. And so wiring will go from the sideboard on the side of the component board. Those items like the throttle and the main contactor, the shunt, things like that will be wired, that get wired to the chassis wiring. This is where it'll come in to our own setup here. And then on the other side, as I mentioned, you can see that the charge port up in the dark there, the orange conduit coming, and it goes up to this junction box. And so that's and here will be the plug from the charger. Will plug into this cable coming out of the junction box. That's our connection between the charge port and the charger. Now, there's a few other components up in here. Our AVC2, safety and unlock relay, things like that are in this junction box also. And so they're all pre-wired. So this is, like I said, it's very modular. You can remove this very easily, disconnect the charge port, unplug the charger, so forth. Everything that we do for the most part is a very modular setup. One, it allows us to be able to crank things out while we're waiting for other components and everything, and do these in a modular fashion with greater efficiency, because we do a lot of these things. And then all the wiring to the vehicle then is again on a terminal strip. So these wires right here, that this is just a rough wiring, goes across, and of course it'll be all tied up nice and neat, but it goes across over to this terminal strip. So there's some stuff that, you know, all the our lines front to rear run down the driver's side here, tucked inside the frame, and then some of them need to cross over from one side to the other, and that's what we have there. That's a 3.3 kilowatt charger. The early 60s vintage, or in this case the Brazilian bus, they're shorter. The distance between the fender well and the rear of the bus is a shorter distance than it is on the later German 60s buses, and of course the 70s, where we have enough room that the charger is horizontal. Here it's at a slight angle because of the lack of distance between the fender well and the back of the vehicle. Well, let's take a look at the front terminal strip real quick. So you can see here's the stock fuse block right here. That was really, I don't know how it didn't just short out and cause a problem, but we kind of fixed it up a little bit so it won't be problematic. We don't want any problems, you know, while the car's in our possession, for sure. But you know, this original spaghetti mess and everything, stuff hanging, you know, that's not our doing. You'll see most VWs are that way. The vintage VWs, they're just a spider web of, well, spider webs, I'm sorry, spiders, that's they're just a spaghetti mess. I mean, just crazy. So anyway, all the wiring from front to rear in the front terminates here. And then our gauges that we'll install and so forth that need to come off here, and some switches like a reverse switch and so forth. This, they'll go from the switch to this terminal strip, and then that wire goes to the rear. And so that's all run and in place while we're, waiting for whatever, like in this case, we're waiting on the battery boxes from the fab shop. So it allows us to do, other things while we're waiting. And so this is some of the things we do. All the hard wiring, get everything in place. When we get the little dash panel in here and we get the gauges, then all that will be, able to be plugged in quickly, and away you go. Quick shot of what comes out of a VW. This is out of the bus that we've been talking about. So here's the engine. There's the oil bath air cleaner, the fuel tank, and the starter motor. So those things aren't needed anymore, and so we get rid of those things. Now, don't be pestering me about wanting them. We have an outfit that disposes of them for us. In this case, the owner's coming to get this one, but that's what comes out, and we're going to put in, the electric components, which are a little more in weight and volume than what's removed. Stock engine's about 240 pounds. We're going to put a little more than that in. So the net will be a weight increase, but it's also going to be quite the performance increase, and it's going to be a decrease in maintenance and a increase in reliability. Just want to show you, this is the voltage regulator that came out of the bus. We removed it because it's not needed. We don't have the generator that the internal combustion system had, and so now we have a DC to DC converter, which is going to charge our 12-volt battery and share that load, and it's all internally regulated, and so that's another item and wiring that we can get rid of. Drop a little bit of weight, not that it's that heavy, but mainly just drop the mess. Get rid of quite a bit of wiring that's just in the way and unsightly. So anyway, perhaps I'll show you some more down the road on this Brazilian bus, and it's really not going to be any different than if you check out the overview we did on the 66 bus. They're basically the same. They're a early 60s looking bus. A few little idiosyncrasies on the Brazilian ones, but for the most part, they're pretty much the same. The 73 Brazilian bus is pretty much the same as a early 60s German bus. So, till next time, enjoy the ride.